With me as well from Nature MB is Alicia McGrattan. She is our education coordinator. If you have any tech questions, if you have any issues with figuring out how to use Zoom or anything, you can drop those in the chat and Alicia can give you a hand. And I also want to welcome Lauren and Katrina, our summer education students, who are also hanging out on the call. All of us at the office have received Jim's presentation before, but it is new for them. So thanks for joining us. The presentation itself is going to run about 40 minutes and we'll do all the questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, you can again just leave them in the chat feature. I am going to keep a list of all of them and I can compile duplicates and we can have a chat about that at the end. The call is scheduled to go until 3, but the call will be available after that. So if we go a few minutes over and we don't get to your question, we may still be able to squeeze it in there at the end. I think that's everything from a housekeeping point of view. So I'm going to introduce our speaker today. So our presenter today is Jim Wilson. He is a New Brunswick naturalist who's been involved with Nature NB for many years in many capacities on our board, on our committees, taking part in surveys, and as part of our general membership. He worked to establish the Point Lepreau Bird Observatory, and that work actually earned him the Order of New Brunswick in 2019. It was in doing that work at Point Lepreau that Jim became aware of the Monarch Butterfly's presence in our province, where you can see it, and became involved with Monarch Watch, which is a tagging and surveying project that he is going to touch on a little bit in his presentation today. So through his work with the Southern NB Monarch Watchers, Jim has actually been one of the people who's been harvesting the milkweed seeds that we send you. So if you have any questions about your milkweed seeds, he is also the guy to ask. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Great to be here. I'm going to ask one quick question. Would it be best if I were on the screen so you can see me, perhaps read my lips, whatever, and also have the slides, or do you want to have just the slides and my voice? What do you think, Jenna? Would that be best or not?
Well, in this presentation view, I can see the slides and I can see you, so I think you're doing great.
Okay.
Keep your video going and that'll be fine.
Okay, great.
Okay,
well, welcome everybody. I know I haven't met each of you, but I've met a lot of you probably in the past. We're going to talk about the monarch butterfly, and it is one of the most amazing insects in the world. It's the only insect that's known to migrate a total of something over 4,000 kilometers every year from southern Canada all the way to Mexico to spend the winter. So it's an amazing butterfly because back it comes in the next spring, and they're coming back right now. We're going to learn about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. So we're up and ready, let's go. So the monarch is a large butterfly, first of all. It's about 10 centimeters wingtip to wingtip. It's about 4 inches. That's big for our butterflies. In fact, it's probably the largest butterfly that we have in New Brunswick. It's orange, black, and white, as you can see. And it's Danaus plexippus is the name. And this is a female monarch butterfly. And this one is a male monarch butterfly. So I don't know if you can notice any physical differences here. And of course, I can't ask you to answer at this point, but I'm going to point them out. Now, the female monarch here, as you can see, it's again black, orange, and white. Patterns are the same, but there's some subtle differences. In the female monarch, you can see that the veining in the wings, right here, these little black lines in the wings, 4 in the hind wings. There's 4 wings, by the way, 1, 2. Those are the 4 wings, F-O-R-E. And the hind wings are the 2 at the back. So there's 4 wings on the butterfly. On the wings, both fore and aft, there's the thick veining, thicker than on the male. So the female has thick veining on the wings, which is pretty obvious compared to him. And he also has a little spot on each of his hind wings. Those are pheromone sacs, or actually false pheromone sacs, where in most insects and other animals that secrete pheromones to attract the opposite sex, the same thing happens with monarchs, but they're more or less inactive because the monarchs actually mate when they're down in Mexico in large numbers. So they really don't need the pheromones to attract from a long distance. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so the female has the wide veining in the wings. The male has narrow veining and has the 2 spots on the hind wing, male and female. Now, the first thing we need to understand, and it's really, really important, and thinking about the life cycle of the monarch, it's totally dependent upon milkweeds, milkweed plants, because that's where the monarch butterflies reproduce. They lay their eggs on milkweed plants, and then the caterpillars hatch, and then they eventually eat their way to adulthood as a caterpillar, and then move into chrysalis and become a butterfly eventually. We're going to go through all of that. So there are two species of milkweed in New Brunswick. The wild natural milkweed that grows widely in the western half of the province, particularly, is the common milkweed. Tall plant, paddle-shaped leaves, beautiful aromatic flowers that attract a lot of pollinators, including monarchs. But it's really important for them to be able to lay their eggs and raise their babies on the common milkweed. But there's also swamp milkweed. It grows wild in lesser numbers, but it's a really good garden plant. Swamp milkweed has a fibrous root, and you can grow it in the garden as a perennial. The common milkweed has a tuberous root, and it spreads underground from one place to another, and it's great to have as long as you can contain it. But if it gets in a garden, it can overwhelm a garden. So you want to have that growing naturally in a more wild place, somewhere on your property, that's fine. But this one, the swamp milkweed, is a garden plant, and that's the one we're giving out seeds and or seedlings for people interested in growing it in the garden. If we could put it all across North America, or all across New Brunswick, we would have a wonderful extension of monarch butterfly swamp milkweed availability for monarchs. Okay, so the story starts in Mexico. We're going to start the life cycle in Mexico, down in southern Mexico, and it's spring. It's March. It's the latter half of March. The butterflies have spent the entire winter in south central Mexico, and we'll talk about where later on, and they're now getting the urge as the days lengthen to move north. They have to migrate north, and they're heading into Texas, the Gulf Coast, even up into Oklahoma, and they're looking for something. They're looking instinctively for milkweed, common milkweed or other milkweeds that they can find, because it's just popping out of the ground at that time, and they're not going to find it in Mexico because it's too arid. They need to lay their eggs on it. So in late March, they fly north from Mexico to South Texas to find first sprouting milkweed. Sole objective is to find fresh milkweed and lay their eggs, because the clock is ticking. After a life of 8 months, because they were born the previous August and they migrated all the way to Mexico, and now it's late March, early April, they're going to die. Instinctively, the life runs out. And hopefully they will find milkweed and be able to lay their eggs on it before their life ends. That's critically, critically important. Now, later on, like this next generation, let's assume that the monarchs have come from Mexico, they've laid their eggs in the southern United States, and they've now died. It takes about a month for the next generation to move from egg to caterpillar to adult butterfly. And so those monarchs that are born from April all the way through to early August are only going to live 2 to 6 weeks each generation. And there's going to be several generations to get us through the summer. And their instinct is, again, to find fresh milkweed further north, mate, lay eggs, and die after 2 to 6 weeks. And both males and females have a similar lifespan. So these spring and summer monarchs only have a short life. They don't need to have a long life to migrate all to Mexico because they're coming north. So it takes about a month for each generation. So when do they reach New Brunswick and how? Okay, they came out of Mexico in late March, laid their eggs in southern United States in early April, and then they died. The next generation takes a month, and it comes further north, dies, the next generation again, and the next. So it takes 2 to 3 generations coming north in the spring, following emerging milkweed, for monarchs to reach New Brunswick. If it takes a month, the month of April is the first generation, another generation further north is the month of May, and the third generation will be reaching southern Canada and New Brunswick as the third generation typically. If the winds are blowing strongly from the south, they can carry the adults further north, and they make better time. 2 to 3 generations following the emerging milkweed to reach us here in New Brunswick. And they're coming in just now in June. There's been some reports already of new monarchs having come north and come into the province in the last couple of weeks. So we're at the northeast limit of milkweed distribution. And we're going to show you on a map later on how that works, how that looks. Historically, we have had limited numbers of monarchs breeding here, most arriving in late June or early July. That's improving because we have more milkweed for them to come to. By July, there are typically reports in New Brunswick of caterpillars on milkweed. Okay, what happens when they find it? Well, here is a female monarch butterfly, and we can see here that her veining on her wings is quite wide and thick. She doesn't have the little spots on the hind wing down below. This is a female. She's clasping a fresh new milkweed leaf, a common milkweed leaf, with one of her legs, and she's touching her abdomen to the bottom of the leaf, and she's about to lay an egg. She'll lay this little tiny egg, and then she'll move to another leaf or another part of the leaf and lay a second egg, and she'll move all around the patch of milkweeds. She can lay in her lifetime anywhere from 400 to 600 or 700 eggs, but she'll spread them around. So here is a milkweed leaf with actually 3 eggs on it, laid by a female monarch butterfly. Little tiny eggs about the size of the head of a pin. They're football shaped, and if you look carefully on milkweed plants, you can find those eggs. They're just an off-white little football shaped egg. And this is one of a series of excellent photographs by Bev England, a friend of ours. And they're some of the best photographs close-up I've seen of eggs and hatching caterpillars. So this is a little football-shaped egg. It looks like a little jewel almost, and it's stuck on. It's got an adhesive that sticks it to the underside of the leaf. And the underside of the common milkweed leaf is hairy. You can see those little tiny fine hairs on it. And she lays that egg on the underside to protect from the rain, or protect maybe from predators that might pick off the egg if it were on top. After 3 to 4 days, the egg begins to look like this. There's something dark happening at one end. What that is the head of a little tiny caterpillar. And here she happened to catch this picture just as it was chewing its way out of the egg, and it came out and came out, and this is so tiny you can barely see it. It's barely visible. So tiny, in fact, that its mouth parts are too small to eat the actual leaf of the milkweed plant. It actually starts to eat the little hair-like structures on the underside of the leaf first, so it can grow. But the first thing it turns its attention to after hatching is to recycle the egg and put some nutrients back into its body, which is really interesting. She caught this on, and I've never seen another picture of this happening, actually, although I knew it did. Very soon, that little tiny caterpillar will grow large enough that it can move to the top of the leaf, and it can begin to eat the actual leaf itself. But the caterpillar is like a lobster. It's like, well, anything non-vertebrate that grows eventually has to shed its skin, like a snake will shed its skin as it grows as well. Well, these little guys have to shed their skin 4 to 5 times before they can go into chrysalis. But the little guy sheds its skin, becomes a little bigger caterpillar, maybe like this one, and eats its way through the leaf. And like you can see, this one here is a bigger one eating its way. Really, they chaw down the leaves like you wouldn't believe. And very soon, after about 15 to 18 days, this large caterpillar is about the size of your baby finger. And that's at the point, after about 18 days, if it has good eating, that it can then move to the next stage of its life, going into a cocoon or a chrysalis. Okay? And at that point, the caterpillar would normally in the wild crawl away from the milkweed patch and go into chrysalis on a shrub or a bush somewhere close by. So we're going to show you what that looks like in a minute. But you can see that these little guys, they grow very rapidly. And there's a lot of predators in the milkweed patch. There are ants, there's spiders, there's wasps, there's all kinds of things. And so only a certain proportion of these little caterpillars will survive. This is how we rear in captivity monarch caterpillars. It's an old fish aquarium. We made a screen top for the top of it so that the caterpillars can't crawl out on their own. The milkweed is provided every day or every other day, and we put it in bottles. These are little spice bottles with a hole drilled in the top, and we cut fresh milkweed plants and put them in there, and the caterpillars go in there too, and they chew away. And eventually, when they grow big enough, after 18 days, the size of your little finger, they'll attempt to crawl away from the milkweed patch. Well, we've got a screen on top. So the best they can do is to crawl up to the top of the screen and there go into chrysalis right there on the top. And what you're seeing on the top are these are chrysalises, and some of the others are caterpillars about to go into chrysalis. So we're going to take you through that next phase of their lives next. But you know, this is a wonderful demonstration for kids, for adults, of the life cycle of a monarch butterfly. You really don't want to raise too many in the one enclosure because sometimes they can spread disease among them. But it's wonderful to be able to demonstrate small numbers just for public education. We do it every summer. So this is the top of the enclosure. This is a caterpillar that wanted to go out, can't. So what it's going to do, rather than going out to a nearby shrub or bush somewhere away from the milkweed patch, it's going to spin a little pad of silk right where the wires cross, and it's going to hook its abdomen, the rear end, into that pad of silk, and it's going to then eventually drop straight down and hang straight down, and eventually curl into a J shape. You can see where it's got this J shape here, and up at the top is a little pad of silk that it's put its rear end into. This is a pad of silk right here. It's very tough silk. There's little hooks on the end of the abdomen. So it hangs straight down, and what it's trying to do now, this caterpillar about to change its whole life shape and life cycle, is wants to split the skin down the center part of its body. It wants to split the skin right here where it's put the most pressure. If you bend your finger, the top of your finger at that point right here is going to have the most stress on the skin. And if it can't, by wiggling and trying to put the pressure by bending, it can actually ingest air into its thorax and eventually split the skin right here, vertically, right down here. That's what it wants to do, and eventually it will do it. So what you're going to see over the next, well, it wouldn't take 2 minutes, maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes. The skin is going to split. The caterpillar, now becoming something else, is going to wiggle that skin off, and it's going to fall to the ground, to the floor. So here we are. Oh, there it is. The skin has split, and you're seeing the body inside, and eventually, look at this, splitting, and finally it wants to get rid of this surplus skin. It doesn't want to have that there, and it finally shakes it off. It wiggles and does all kinds of gyrations to get rid of it, and then you're left with, well, not a caterpillar anymore. You're left with a chrysalis, another form, another stage in this life cycle, the third stage. This exterior will harden, become a harder shell, and eventually look like this. And after a few more hours, it will become even more hard. And this is what one would look like in the wild. This is one on a shrub's branch. The little stem here is what was part of the abdomen of the caterpillar, hooked in here firmly. And this little jewel case now of life is going to take about 10 days, 9 to 12 days, depending on the temperature and the amount of sunlight, to form a butterfly inside that chrysalis. So this is chrysalis day 1. It's a nice lime green adorned with these little gold spots and a sort of a semicircle of gold and black that runs right around the other side, so on the equal side, about 180 degrees. And so quietly it just hangs there, very vulnerable, but normally in a sheltered, quiet place. After 11 days, after 10 days, this is the 11th day, normally in the afternoon, the chrysalis will turn almost black at first, and then suddenly you can see through it, it becomes transparent, and you realize there's something in there, and it's something that looks familiar. That's a butterfly's wing. Normally this happens, as I said, in the second half of the day. The next morning, usually bright and early, if it's quite warm in the summer, that will split and out will come a butterfly. So it takes about, say, 10 days on average to produce this from when it went into chrysalis. Okay, what you're going to see next is, again, another 2-minute affair. It's going to split at the bottom, and then it's going to open up, and something's going to come out. Okay, here we go. There is a split right there at the bottom. You can see it. And This is going to happen almost, well, not quite as fast as we're doing it here, but pretty darn fast. And suddenly out comes, well, it looks like a butterfly, sort of, but it's got some more development to do before we see a true butterfly. You notice the abdomen is grossly distended. It's full of blood. The wings are very tiny. They don't have any blood in them at all. And what's going to happen, it's going to pump from its abdomen into its wings its body fluids, its blood, and it's going to become a butterfly that needs to take time to dry. So it turns around and it lets its wings hang down for the force of gravity to help it. And its proboscis, the little feeding tube that's right here, normally it would be a long, round hose-like feeding tube, is in two halves. So the butterfly has to organize that and get the two halves to knit together to form one single feeding tube. So it's got some work to do. So that's about 5 minutes after it emerged. This is about probably 20 minutes after it emerged. This is an hour and a half after the butterfly emerged. And now we're starting to see something that looks more familiar. The feeding tube looks like a round hose now, all curled up. And of course, its wings look much more like a monarch butterfly, but they're very, very soft. They need hours to dry and harden and become hard enough that it can take its first flight before the end of the day. So that's why this butterfly will normally come out and emerge, before 10 o'clock in the morning on a summer morning, usually quite early. And eventually, by late afternoon, it's capable of taking its first flight, and by the following day to go and start, not eating any more milkweed, start to nectar like any other butterfly would on blooming plants of various kinds. So there you have it. We've seen the complete development from egg to adult butterfly of the monarch. And monarch butterflies are a wonderful introduction to kids for nature, or adults for that matter. I have raised more monarchs here at the house and had more people just blown away by watching some of this stuff than you can imagine. And you couple that with the migration and all of that we're going to see in a minute. These are amazing insects, and they're a wonderful gateway into nature for people. Okay, let's talk about monarchs and milkweeds, the dependents. I've already emphasized it, but I can't emphasize it enough. Excuse me. For feeding, of course, the monarch needs the milkweed as a caterpillar, but then as an adult, it really only needs it for laying its eggs for the next generation. So milkweed is the sole food plant for monarch caterpillars. Reproduction of monarchs is totally dependent on the plants. If we had, say, a blight of some kind that wiped out all of the milkweed in North America, there would be no more monarchs in one more generation. It would be that abrupt and that quick. There's about 100 species across North America of milkweeds, but only about a dozen are used by monarchs for breeding. That may be because of the chemicals that are found in the plants. I'll get into that in a minute. The sap, that's where I'm talking about the chemicals, has a heart poison. Milkweed is called milkweed because it has a sticky, thick sap. You're probably familiar with dandelion sap, white, milky, but very thin. Milkweed has a thicker, more sticky sap, and it has a mild heart poison that when the caterpillar eats it, doesn't affect the caterpillar at all. But what it does do, it imbues the cells of the caterpillar with that poison. And that provides a bit of protection for both the caterpillar and eventually the adult butterfly, whose cells are also imbued through the caterpillar. So that provides protection from predators. For example, the adults in migration could be attacked by a bird, a hawk, or some songbird, and try to be eaten, but they taste bad, and they provide a bad experience for whatever tries to eat them or take a bite out of them. Okay, now we know, and we said at the beginning, that the summer generations of monarchs, that is from April through to August, are butterflies that are only going to last for 2 to 6 weeks of life. And they have to lay their eggs before that time expires, and then they have to move north as far as they can lay their eggs, and then they die, and the next generation carries on going further north. Well, once they get to southern Canada, the limit of milkweed, that's as far as they're going to go. And by then, it's usually into late July, August. So monarchs that are born after early August. And it all has to do with the angle of the sun and the length of the days. Suddenly, they stop breeding after that, and they become a generation that's going to live 8 months, again, like the ones that did last winter. And that gives them long enough to migrate to Mexico, to winter over there, and return as far as the southern United States the next spring. So we really got a complete change in the monarch, and it's all in the monarch's brain, and it's stimulated by the length of the days, the slowing of the days, and the angle of the sun in the sky, which drops lower and lower with each succeeding day. So by early August, any monarchs born after that are going to be ones that are going to migrate to Mexico. Pretty amazing. So they change by mid-August. What happens? Well, the shorter days stimulus to cease breeding, no more sex. Like birds, monarchs become restless. Okay? Birds, same thing. The length of the days affects bird migration as well. They become restless. They want to move somewhere. They don't know where, but instinct will take them. Butterflies are hungry. They begin to store lipids or fats. 4,000 kilometer migration to Mexico is their next step. And it's all done instinctively because none of this generation has ever gone before. And yet they will migrate those 4,000 kilometers from southern Canada all the way to Mexico and end up in the same small area that their great-great-great-grandparents were last winter. It's amazing. No one knows how this happens, but it does. So how do we know all this? Well, a lot of it's by the tagging of monarchs. University of Kansas sponsors Monarch Watch, which is a program to track southern migration by putting tags, adhesive wing tags, on the wings of monarch butterflies. Online database exists for matching the tagging information, where you tagged it, when you tagged it, who tagged it, with subsequent sightings on the migration path further south. And down in Mexico, where the monarchs are going to be overwintering, Mexicans are paid $5 for each recovery of a tag. But they're not allowed to touch any of the monarchs in the sanctuaries down there where they overwinter. They have to wait for something to happen to the monarch, and it falls to the ground or dies down there. And some of them do die, even though there's, most of them overwinter. So we'll get into more of that in a minute. Turns out, because we have an observatory at Point Lepreau counting seabirds, we realized that there's all kinds of monarch butterflies that pass through there in the fall during migration. And the reason why is because they follow the coast, instinctively going south. And when they come to Point Lepreau, they're kind of funneled out on the tip of Point Lepreau by the geography. And there they find hectare after hectare of blooming plants in the fall, and they stop to feed. So it's a great place to tag some of these monarchs that are headed south. There's goldenrod, there's asters, and there are thistle. They love English thistle. And there's a lot of nectar there. You can actually see this monarch nectaring with its proboscis into the thistle. Those are legs, but this is the proboscis right here, sopping up that beautiful nectar because that's the energy it needs to fly further. This is a tag. It's about 1 centimeter in diameter. It's got information on it about the program, a 1-800 tagging number, and a unique HHP, in this case 555, next one 556. There's 25 tags to a sheet. They're like stamps, used to be on a sort of a sticky sheet where you can just peel off the tag and then apply it to the monarch butterfly's wing. Special non-toxic adhesive to hold fast to the wing. You have to know how to put it on, but it's not too difficult. And we tagged last year over 1,000 monarchs, not just at Point Lepreau, but in southern New Brunswick with the St. John Naturalist Club. So that was the most we've ever tagged before. And we're going to continue that again this year. This is a monarch with a tag on the wing. Put it right in the center of the forewing, just a little spot there. And it's bound for Mexico. We release them and off they go. Sometimes they'll go right back to blooming plants. Sometimes they'll fly over the water and continue their journey. Now, we are here, and this is an interesting map. This map shows the limit, more or less, of milkweed, common milkweed, and the milkweed that monarchs like in North America. And if you'll notice, it's just about halfway into New Brunswick, which is just about the St. John River Valley. Well, by planting more milkweed, we hope we could extend the monarch geographical area in New Brunswick all the way to the east. So we're hopeful by giving away the seeds and plants and people planting them in their garden, we might be able to improve on some of the area that monarchs have to be in the summer. Anyway, they head down for this area right here, the neovolcanic belt of mountains in south central Mexico. All of the monarchs, and we're talking only ones from east of the Rocky Mountains. The ones west of the Rockies actually go to the California coast, but the majority of North America are east of the Rockies, and they all funnel down. Most go around the Gulf, but some go right across it. People have seen them from boats and from oil rigs. Some go down to Florida, and it's thought to go on down to the Yucatan and then on over. But the majority flow down through Texas and end up there by around the 1st of November. Now, Jean and I and some friends actually went to the monarch sanctuaries in 2007, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in nature. So let's go there. They arrive in the neovolcanic mountains by early November in Mexico. They spend the winter in Mexico, all these adult monarchs that are going to stay right through the spring, on mature fir trees at 9,000 to 12,000 feet up, way up high in the mountains. The entire winter area, only 160 square kilometers, 62 square miles, and it's cold there, but just doesn't quite freeze. It just got the right climate, and they're very quiet there, and some colonies in the past have been estimated at 70 million monarch butterflies. Colonies were first discovered by scientists in 1975. And I remember seeing this National Geographic book come out, or magazine come out, it was in August of 1976, announcing to the world the discovery of the monarch butterfly wintering areas. They knew through tagging that they headed down and went into Mexico somewhere, didn't find them till 1975. And so I remember looking at this thinking, I got to go there someday. I got to see this. And sure enough, we did. We went down in 2007. This is a picture I took looking up into the mountains where the sanctuaries are from down further and thinking, boy, tomorrow we're going to be up there. We walked up, we drove as far as we could. We walked up a small little hiking trail to a private mountaintop where we had to have permission to go in. We probably had to go a couple thousand feet in elevation from where we parked the car. And then we began to get into monarchs on the trees. And the sun was shining. It was late March. Butterflies almost ready to leave and go to Mexico or to Texas. There were butterflies on the sides of the trees. There were butterflies on the foliage. There were butterflies in the air. The sky was full of monarch butterflies. It was astounding. We were talking in normal tones when we get up into that area, and within 15 minutes we were whispering to each other because the butterflies were all around us. It was amazing. We visited 2 sanctuaries. Both were like this. The other one was a public sanctuary. The day was cool. The butterflies weren't flying like they were the first day. So we had the best of all worlds. We could see how they normally would be clustered in the winter, and we also saw how spectacular they could be in the nice warm spring day on the other mountain. So it was just, I highly recommend this experience for anyone that wants to go. There are tours that are available. Okay. We want to look now at the trend of population. Now, what happens here, I wonder if we could, guys, if we could see that entire graph. Is there a way to do this? I'd like to be able to take the lower boxes out if I could. I can't move that over, but basically what you're seeing here is a graph that shows right through to last winter the estimated number of monarchs that are in those wintering areas, that 60 square mile area. And they do it by taking aerial photographs of the trees with the monarchs clustered on them, and then estimating the number of hectares. But what you can see here clearly, look at the trend. The trend in numbers over the last 20 or 25 years is down, down, down. And in 2013, 2014, right here, less than 1 hectare. That was the entire wintering population in Mexico. It took a rebound here in 2015, 16, took another rebound here. This was in 18, 19. But then last year dropped again to just about this level over here. So it's a critical situation that's taken a lot of study to try and find out what the heck is going on with the monarchs. How come they're going down in numbers consistently? And it is a dramatic drop. It's like 90% drop over the last 20 years. So what they've found is a number of threats. that are happening, not just one single thing. The first is there's illegal logging at those Mexican winter sanctuaries. As important as they are, there's illegal logging. That's trying to be stopped, but it still continues. It opens up the canopy and the butterflies are exposed to weather that they previously wouldn't be under the canopy. There's a lack of milkweed, which is a big factor in the life cycle area from southern United States up to Canada through drought or the use of herbicides. There's a lack of blooming flowers on migration south, believe it or not. Remember, they have to nectar on their migration. That's where they get their energy. Roadside mowing is a big one. If there wasn't roadside mowing, there'd be a lot more blooming plants. And when they're migrating in August and September, that's when a lot of the roadside mowing in North America gets done. Also urban sprawl. Winter storms at Mexican sanctuaries because of climate change. More dramatic storms down there that really are harder on the butterflies. And climate change over the long term is a question mark. No one knows for sure. Now, I'm going to come back to that lack of milkweed drought here because I want to show you a picture. We were in Texas several springs ago, bird watching actually. The Texas area for growing corn and soybeans is like the prairies. It's huge. You can see the trees way out there. Well, before genetically modified corn seed and soybean seeds, there used to be between the rows lots of milkweed plants growing as weeds and all around the perimeter of these vast fields. So there was tons of milkweed. And when the butterflies came out of Mexico in late March looking for milkweed in Texas, Oklahoma, Gulf Coast, they would easily find it because it was in all these plantations, all these fields. Now they have genetically modified seeds where they can plant the seed and then eradicate everything else but the corn with a herbicide that takes away the milkweed. And that was one of the biggest things because when they come out, they have to find milkweed when they're coming out of Mexico or they're going to die in a few weeks. And if they can't find milkweed, then they never reproduce the next generation to start off the summer again. And that's been a huge factor. So this is something, their planting of milkweed and protecting the milkweed in that country down there and anywhere else is very, very important. So what can we do? I'm going to wind up here in a couple of seconds. We can plant milkweed, either common or swamp. And swamp is the ideal perennial garden plant. And Nature NB is emphasizing that as well as the St. John Naturalist Club and the Southern New Brunswick Monarch Watchers. And I think it's a wonderful program that we need to continue. The second thing is let's protect the wild milkweed that we have all across North America and in New Brunswick. Most of it's common milkweed. People think it's a weed. They don't like it. Well, it's important for monarchs. Preserve blooming roadside plants. Imagine if every state and every province in North America could just stop roadside mowing at the wrong time, mow it sometime later in the season after the monarchs have gone through, would be a huge plus for making blooming plants available to migrating monarchs. Support monarch conservation efforts. Promote monarch awareness with family, friends, and the public, and learn about potential risks of herbicide use. All of those things can make a huge difference if most of the population were more aware of them, most of the people, or human population. I want to mention one thing as we're wrapping up here. We're almost done. I told you we do some tagging at Point Lepreau. Well, we had RAT935. This is a data sheet that we write down when we tag them. There's the tag number. There's a date. It was August 30th, 2012. It was a male. It was wild. We caught it there at Point Lepreau. And that RAT935, there's RAT935 recovered in Mexico at one of the sanctuaries. And it was one of the sanctuaries that Jean and I had visited when we were there in 2007. This was picked up by one of the Mexicans in El Rosario Sanctuary in February of 2013. And I have the name of the Mexican that picked it up, and I would love to go back down there and meet that person because he would have no idea where the tag came from or how it got put on there, and we could have a nice story over a beer, hopefully. Anyway, there's a little certificate of appreciation for anybody that has a recovery from Monarch Watch, gives the date, and it also said that that monarch, based on GPS data, traveled 4,251 kilometers, that's 2,642 miles, from Point Lepreau to the sanctuary where it was found. Amazing. Okay, wrapping up, last slide, second to last slide. Just want to say that that little tiny egg the size of the head of a pin on a milkweed leaf has all the genetic information to produce a butterfly like this that could travel 4,000 and some kilometers all the way to Mexico and then 500 kilometers back to Texas or the Gulf Coast the next spring in order to continue the population of monarch butterflies. Pretty amazing stuff. And that's my presentation. So if you have any questions, we can deal with that now in the time that remains.
Thank you so much, Jim. That presentation is always amazing. You're such a great storyteller too. Whenever you do the grand reveal that the monarchs born here live 8 months, it gives me a little chill. If anybody has any questions for Jim, you can drop them in the chat right now. We have a couple comments coming in right now. Thanks, Jim. Great presentation, says Susan. Susan, thank you so much for participating today. Philip also says, thank you. You're a great speaker. Thanks for your work. I'm seeing a lot of praise and not a lot of questions, so maybe you answered everything the first time around, Jim.
Well, it could be. I would say that one of the things we've, in trying to disseminate milkweed across New Brunswick, one of the two or three things. When you're planting the seeds or the seedlings, if you plant seeds and raise them into small plants, you want to set them in your garden in a place that you specially prepared so there's not much competition for the seedlings to get started. Once they get started, they'll be good, robust plants. They can grow chest high after a couple of years and be an ongoing perennial. But they need space. And the other thing we found is that when monarch butterflies come along and find the growing swamp milkweed plants in a garden, the female, she'll lay her eggs on the plant or plants, and she can lay a lot of eggs. So we found that if you only have one plant or maybe even just two plants, she'll lay enough eggs that the caterpillars can literally consume the plant and all of the leaves on the plant. It won't kill the plant, but the problem is for the caterpillars, they run out of food. So we're recommending that if you're going to set swamp milkweed in the garden, you really should put in maybe a half a dozen or even more plants if you have the space, so that when she comes and lays her eggs, she can spread them around on a number of plants, and then there's enough food for all the caterpillars. Mm-hmm. We learned that the hard way. Last year, I don't know how many different batches of caterpillars we helped find more milkweed for, because people would call up and say, gosh, they've eaten us out of house and home, literally. What do we do? So we had them take the caterpillars to a wild patch of milkweed and put them there, and then they were fine. But in a garden, it's nice to have the whole life cycle happening. So you want to have more than just one or two plants if possible.
All right, Jim, we do have some questions coming in. So our first question is from Rachel. Rachel has a lot of monarch-looking butterflies in her area, but they are very yellow. Is this another species of monarch?
Great question. And unfortunately, time didn't permit putting something in. But yes, there's a lot of species. We have about 80 species of butterflies that have been discovered in North America, a bit more than that. And probably 40 to 50 of those are relatively commonly encountered. The one you're seeing that's large and yellow now is a completely different butterfly. It's the Canadian tiger swallowtail. And unlike the monarch, it doesn't migrate. It lays its eggs on birches and the leaves of a few other trees. I don't know what other species now, maybe maples. It's a non-migratory butterfly, and virtually all the other ones we have are non-migratory. We do get a few that come into the province from further south each summer, and then they die eventually. But the monarch's the only one that goes. Monarch is much larger than any of the other orange, black, and white butterflies that we have, and the Canadian tiger swallowtail is yellow, not orange. So that's a clue. The one that's the closest to it is, and you can look this up online, is the viceroy. It's actually thought to perhaps be a monarch mimic, but it has a band of black across the hind wing that identifies it as a different butterfly. And although it looks like a monarch, it doesn't migrate. It's a local butterfly that spends its entire life here. So if you go online or just look up a few of those butterfly species that we have, you'll find that there's some lookalikes, but not many. And the monarch is unique in being large and has a unique pattern all its own.
We have a question from Anna. Anna asks, have you found that rearing the caterpillars increases the number that survive? Is it worth doing, or is it best to let them continue their life cycle naturally?
It's a great question because I've been through this from one end of it to the other, really, I guess. Um, there is a fairly high mortality of monarchs in the wild. Uh, I've discovered, or we've discovered, that common milkweed, which grows often in hay fields and has a lot of undergrowth underneath it, harbors a lot of predators for the caterpillars or the eggs, spiders, ants, that kind of thing. It seems that swamp milkweed in gardens, which are cleaner underneath, there's not a lot of substrate of other vegetation in a garden. There's not nearly as many predators on plants. The answer is sort of yes and no, meaning that yes, in places where there'd normally be a high mortality, bringing them in and raising them, as I was doing there in the example, is going to produce more, proportionally more from that batch of eggs. But at the same time, if you try to do a lot of it, you can spread disease between the caterpillars being raised, and you end up with some of them dying and not doing well. So raising a few of them for demonstration for people certainly does help, and it does contribute to the wild population. But if you can plant plants in your garden and keep them quite clean and not have too many predators there, you're going to have a high output of butterflies from that. We found that in garden after garden last year. There was a lot of butterflies being produced from caterpillars. So I think planting in gardens is the best thing. Raising in captivity is good for education, but it isn't going to help the population in a meaningful way.
Okay, next question comes from Sam. Sam asks, obviously you can touch a butterfly to tag it. So is it a myth that they die when we touch them?
It is. It is a myth. Monarchs, and there's another point that I'm glad you brought this up, they are built differently than any of our other butterflies. The scales on their wings do not come off in your fingers as they might with some of the smaller butterflies. So handling the smaller butterflies, really the best is not to handle them too much because the protective scaling on the wings will come off. It doesn't kill the butterfly, it just fades the colors and makes it a little harder. But monarchs, there's no noticeable wear and tear on them when you handle them. The wings have, the veining in the wings are almost like little bones because, again, they're going to fly 4,000 kilometers. Very strong wings. And as I say, the scales do not come off. So, yeah, you can handle them quite nicely. You have to know how to handle them, but that's not too difficult. All you have to be is with someone that can show you a few pointers. And we can put that tag on, and obviously it doesn't seem to hold them up, and they make it all the way to Mexico. Thousands are recovered down there every year that have been tagged from northern North America.
All right, Lauren says, Jim, thank you for the presentation. Wondering if the first generation does continue to go north or stray after they lay their eggs, or if they stay pretty nearby to die.
No, they continue as far as they can go. That's a great question too, to understand everything. Yeah, their instinct is to fly north, and they lay their eggs as they go. So if let's say in the Gulf Coast, it's April, that generation starts north. They will lay their eggs on the first milkweed plants they can find, presumably, and then continue on. As the further north they go, the more milkweed plants will be growing out of the ground. So it'll be easier for them to find as they go along. And basically, they continue until their life runs out, as I understand it. They have to find a mate along the way, or mates, but that's not too difficult. And what the males tend to do is they will hang out, like the local males, will hang out around milkweed patches because they know the females are looking for milkweed. Well, the males are looking for females. So if they both hang out at the milkweed patch, they're going to get together. So that's what they do. And until the time runs out, they will continue to lay eggs. And, if you have adverse winds, let's say, for example, where the butterflies have a hard time making it north, if it was a north wind flying against it, it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't make as good a distance over their lifetime of 2 to 6 weeks. But sometimes they have favorable winds that will carry them north very, very rapidly, in which case they leapfrog presumably right over some of the milkweed, but they'd get further north and be able to extend the population more rapidly in one year than perhaps another.
All right, Chuck Perry says, thank you. Doesn't matter how many times he hears you talk about this, Jim, it's still fascinating.
Chuck's heard it a number of times, I think.
Another question from Rachel. This is a question that I've also been wondering about. What's the difference between butterflies and moths?
Okay. Well, Moths, of course, generally speaking, are night flying, and butterflies are day flyers. Moths have a very feathery antenna. Butterflies have just a hair-like antenna with a little bulbous tip on it. Moth wings usually, but not always, are flattened out. Like they usually have flattened wings when they're resting, where butterflies will often raise their wings up. There's a number of other features. I should really kind of research that a bit more, but those are fundamental things when you're looking at it. Most moths are soft and feathery. They have very feathery antennas, as I mentioned, and most are, twilight or nighttime flyers too.
Very cool. I've seen lots of moths this year. I haven't seen as many. I've seen lots of swallowtails and lots of moths.
Yeah. There's a great year for Canadian tiger swallowtail.
Yeah.
Butterflies, and I assume moths too, but butterflies love nice warm weather. So we're getting lots of that. So it should be good for all species of butterflies this year.
Couple more questions. Laurel, do we know if there are any other jumping off points for migrating monarchs in NB other than Point Lepreau?
That's another great question. Well, Point Lepreau, for some reason, seems to have more monarchs than anywhere else along the Bay of Fundy coast. When you get from Point Lepreau downward further, you'll see some, and you will also see them on Grand Manan Island. There's quite a few that appear there. And so what we think is happening is that the St. John River Valley may be a migration conduit for monarchs coming out of the central part or the northern part of New Brunswick. Most of our monarchs are from, well, 2/3 of the way up the province. The very northern part doesn't have as many, nor does the northeast. And you can see that on that map of Milkweed. So it almost looks like the monarchs and migrating birds as well will follow landforms to orient themselves to some degree. And the St. John River, generally speaking, runs sort of, north-south in a general way. And so we think that the monarchs kind of follow the St. John River Valley and then come out to the Bay of Fundy coast above Point Lepreau, not very far, in St. John, and then seem to move down the coast, follow the coast further south in the direction they need to go. And Point Lepreau just funnels them out, and there it is with all its blooming plants. We do know that the eastern part of the province, like Point Escumenac, the Acadian Peninsula, when I talk to naturalists up there, they say to see a monarch is a big deal. They don't see them up there. They just don't have. They don't have much milkweed there, but they also don't seem to stray there very much. It's just the way it seems to be. So I think the St. John River Valley has a big factor in their migration at the moment. I think if we planted more milkweed and they could extend the availability of milkweed further east, we'd see a lot more monarchs in those areas. We don't see them now. The other thing that kind of lends credibility to this theory is that we caught a tagged monarch at Point Lepreau 2 years ago that was tagged by Kathy White up the St. John River Valley above Fredericton. She tags quite a few. And one of her monarchs we got at Point Lepreau, presumably coming down the St. John River Valley and then coming to us. Every year that goes by, we learn more.
All right, we got a couple more questions here. We will wrap up with these. First, Shani wants to know, if I were to raise a few eggs at home, how much milkweed per caterpillar would I need to have access to?
Yeah, well, a caterpillar, well, the milkweed plants, when you harvest them, we cut them, right? And we put them in water right away. Usually every couple of days, they need to be refreshed because if a caterpillar got on a milkweed plant, yeah, it would chew it up, but 2 or 3 caterpillars would eat it in a day or two, for sure. So you'd want to be prepared to go and get fresh milkweed plants every couple of days. And I wouldn't raise, I would limit the number depending on the size of your aquarium, your space. I wouldn't raise any more than 25 or 30 at a time. I've raised as many as 100, but it's so crowded, it gets really a hassle to get your milkweed and, have to move them and clean and all of that. Small numbers of them, 25, 30 at a time is good. And then you don't have nearly the amount of work. But you'd have, every couple of days, you'd have to go get a few milkweed plants and freshen things up. And they also poop a lot. The poop doesn't smell bad. It just dries, it's little dry pellets. But you need to clean it every few days too. You can just brush it up. Keep it dry in there and keep all your water in the containers. And you can just brush it and clean it up very easily. But you have to remove your caterpillars and transfer them from one plant to another very gently.
Anna would like to know how monarchs find milkweed, especially in places where it's been planted but doesn't grow nearby.
They can smell it. They can sense it, and they have very keen awareness of it from quite a distance away. They sense and taste with their feet, but they also, I don't know whether they use their antennae or what they use to actually sense and locate milkweed at a distance. You know, the smell brought on the wind, presumably. But they can find it, and boy, they home right in on it. Both males and females, because the males, as I say, they hang out on a milkweed patch, and they'll wait for any female that comes along. And I will say too that the males, more than one male, will sometimes be at the milkweed patch, and they fight over the turf a lot, like a lot of creatures do. And so I guess the best guy wins out, and he gets to all the action.
All right, we'll finish up with this great question just came in from Marika. Are there any local initiatives that have proved successful for direct seeding into restoration sites versus the success of transplanting already established plants?
I'm not aware of anything local. It's the seeds seem to, you know, they're not as, they're easier to grow indoors and get started in flats or a greenhouse, more dependable, than to put them outside, because when they first start, it's really hard to know in the spring what's a seed of a milkweed and what's a weed. And if they're crowded too much with weeds, they don't seem to do very well. So, you know, the approach we've taken is simply to try and, you know, have the seeds, have people plant the seeds in the winter, have seedlings ready when the frost is past in the spring, and put those in the gardens. By then, they're, you know, probably 6 or 8 inches tall, and you can identify, you know, what they are, and then they can be tended to much more effectively. Not to say you couldn't do something like that, but it's been easier to go the other route from what we've done.
Yeah, speaking as somebody who I planted all of mine, if you get a package from Nature New Brunswick, there'll be about anywhere between 50 to 75 seeds in that bag. I planted an entire bag. They all grew, and like they all started inside, and then they all grew out in my garden. So as long as you follow the instructions that come with it have been prepared by the Southern New Brunswick Monarch Watchers, you can very successfully grow the seedlings at home. This year, of course, was a bit of a unique case where we were working from home. I was able to kind of baby the seeds, you know, check on them multiple times a day. But even in future years where I'm not working from home, I'm still pretty confident that I'll be able to get them to grow. Oh, one last question is squeaked in. I think we will answer this one as well because it's very interesting. How long are the seeds? Oh, you first.
No, I was just going to say, I want to come back to the question of the seedlings before we're finished, but that's fine.
Okay.
Let's do this question.
Another question semi-related to it. How long are seeds viable year to year?
Good question. I know friends of ours planted some that were 1 year old. We had harvested them in the fall of 2019, and no, that wouldn't be right, 2018. And we also had some in 2019, of course, and the ones from 2018 did grow. And these are master gardeners. They're really, really good at what they do. I don't know whether they soaked them a little bit before they planted. I'm not sure. I could find out. But boy, did they produce some beautiful plants from them. What I was going to say is that I think it's growing these plants doesn't take a lot of space as seedlings. It would be wonderful if we, the collective we, nature in me, etc., could find greenhouses around the province that would be willing to make available a little bit of space. Maybe we even raise some money to pay them for the space, whatever, sure. But then if you geographically had a greenhouse in various parts of the province and that could start seedlings indoors and raise really good, stout, healthy seedlings, you know, 6, 8, 10 inches tall, then they could be distributed. And you've got the greenhouse in the geographical area locally. People could come and get those, take orders, organize it, get those seedlings. I think it would be a wonderful thing, because often people will get seeds and, you know, they never get around to planting them, or maybe when they do, they don't do it quite right, even though the instructions are there. All kinds of reasons why not. But boy, you give someone a plant, they'll take it and they'll baby it and they'll look after it like they would a pet. Okay, so I think that's the ultimate if we could get there. And we actually have friends in Hampton who made space in a greenhouse at a senior's home. And it didn't take much space, and they were blown away by the number of people that came with their hands out looking for milkweed seeds. And so they said, wow, we're in. We want to help next year as much as we can, and we want to tag Monarchs this summer, because they were completely unaware of all of this. And boy, I'm telling you, they're converted now.
Very, very encouraging to hear.
Okay. Well, if that wraps it up, Jenna, I thank you very much for organizing this. You did a great job, and anybody else behind the scenes. And thank everybody else for participating, and great questions, and I hope it was helpful. It's an ideal time to be doing this because the monarchs are just coming into the province. So there's various organizations working on this stuff, and keep in touch, and maybe you can get to tag
Yes.
this fall.
That would be very exciting. If anybody does see a monarch, you can always send it to us on Twitter, on Facebook. You can share it with us on Instagram. We would love to see any local monarch sightings, and we may even repost it on our social media. So if you have any sightings, you can always let us know. You can also upload them to Monarch Watch or to iNaturalist, different citizen science platforms where people are always looking for data about monarchs. Obviously, they are a species that's as Jim showed in the data, they are a species in decline, they are a species at risk. So any amount of intervention from citizen scientists is really valued. So thank you so much, Jim, and thank you everybody for participating today. As I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation will be available on YouTube for you to share after the fact. So once it is there, share it wide, and you can even watch it again to see if you missed anything the first time around. So thank you so much, Jim. Have a good day.
You're welcome. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.